Welcome to Authentic Studio. So today our guest, I'm very excited to welcome my friend Gary. But I want him to introduce himself because I think, so you can listen to his English instead of mine.
I think you've got it okay, Ivan.
Thank you.
Yep. So my name's Gary Sutcliffe, and I've known this character for about 20 years. I'm a very young 76-year-old, and I live over in the retirement village in Hobsonville. Been there for about just under a year. So yeah.
The reason why I really want to talk to you is, of course, I know you for 20 years, but I think to me, one of the things most standing out among all is that you have a amazing heart. You help people, you do whatever you can, and you have done many amazing things for people from your own personal times. And so to me, that is what I would describe as authenticity.
Okay.
You're just being who you are.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess it'd be fair to say that particularly over the last 30 years or so, I've been driven more by passion. Than passion for wanting to make a difference and passion for helping people. I've never been motivated by money, probably much to my detriment over the years, but that's okay. But it's it's that helping, wanting to make a difference by sharing some of my experiences to help other people.
And that's where I met you, which is in a mental health sector, I would say, of you. Way back in about 20 years, I was just started at Mind and Body as a peer support worker.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's what you were doing when we met. I'm thinking around 2004, 5 maybe. Yep.
And throughout that whole time, that is what I admire the most is you the same person every time when I met you. Some people, circumstances or whatever, you see they change, but you still choose love, respect, care, regardless of the situation and what it is.
Yeah, and I think, when you talked about your new venture, authenticity, I guess if you wanted to sum me up in a few words, authentic is one of those things I believed in. I don't talk one thing and mean another or anything like that. So it's just sort of just being who I am, really. So
yeah. So just before we dive into any further conversation, would you like to introduce a little bit more about your family?
Yeah, okay. So probably one of the things that I've told quite a few people, when I was 4 days old, my father got on a ship and went to England on a cricket tour. So I was literally 4 days old, and when he came home, I was 9 months old. So in those days, cricket tours took a long time because it all went by ship and that sort of thing, and they were long tours. So so I was, I'd probably advanced quite a lot. So I lived with my mum and my grandparents while Dad was away in Auckland, and then we shifted to Dunedin when I was 9 months old, pretty much. And while we're in Dunedin, my eldest sister was born, Christine, so was born, and then 5 years after that, my youngest sister Lynn was born. So I've got 2 sisters. My dad, as I've just mentioned, went on a cricket tour, so he did quite a few tours with the New Zealand cricket team, and so yeah, I guess you could say I've sort of got a famous father, but one of the good things is I didn't have a lot of talent in cricket, so people didn't expect too much of me.
Oh, no, I don't think I think it just depends. I think your heart is in somewhere else, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I love the game of cricket.
Yeah.
I didn't have Dad's level of skills, and I didn't expect to. You know, these sort of things don't automatically go from father to son. But yeah, no, I loved the game, loved playing sport. It was a big part of my life.
Cool.
I wasn't a very good scholar.
But you are an amazing human being. I think that's the most important thing. The rest, you know, like it's just labor. Like, you know, I don't see, personally, I don't see the values of many things that people gain from status or whatever, because if they are not a decent human being, there's not a point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just being your own person, really. And I suppose when I think about some of the people I know where, say in cricket, where the son probably had the talent, and so therefore is expected more of them.
Sure.
So you probably had something to live up to, whereas I didn't, because I didn't even scratch the surface of that. But the mere fact that I loved the game, and that was sort of our common bond, really, was around that. Yeah.
And do you think your childhood shaped who you are today at all? You know, or...
It's hard to say, really, because I grew up sort of not having to go without anything. We lived in a house in Dunedin. Dad was a teacher initially, then he was a cricket coach down there, and then he bought a sports store down in Dunedin while we were there. And because I was a kid, I mean, I went to, sort of grew up there, went to primary school in Dunedin, and then for the first term of, when I just turned 13, I was at a school, Kaikra Valley High School in Dunedin, and then we moved north. So I had no idea just how hard things were financially for my parents, because it was one of those things, don't worry the kids, sort of thing. So what I subsequently found out, actually many years later, just talking to Dad one-on-one, and I sort of found out that really, if it wasn't for the money that was raised in a testimonial match for him in Dunedin, he would have come away with nothing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sort of had to sell the house to pay his creditors because his business, retail business, went down as well. So, but we never knew that. Never knew it. We were never impacted by it. I can never think of a time when we were not able to get, to live a good life as kids. So
Thank you. It sounds like you have a good relationship with your father, more or less.
Yeah, it's an interesting relationship. I mean, Dad was away a lot from when I was born, pretty much, and Dad did his last tour when I was 15, 16.
Yeah.
I think I was 16 when I was last year. So Dad played for his country for a long time, about 18 years or something like that. So, I guess I grew up with cricket in the house, but one of the good things about that is I met so many people.
True.
That came through. Initially cricketers, and then when Dad started with the Rothman Sports Foundation, I was able to meet people like, Peter Snell and Don Clark and Arthur Lydiard and some of these, wonderful cricket icons, or sporting icons from New Zealand. So we always had people in our house.
Yes.
We were a bit of a party central, I think, back in the Dunedin days.
Oh, nice.
So as kids, we sort of grew up with a pretty happy household, really.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. I didn't even know. That's pretty cool.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Oh. So would you, the reason why I get into mental health is because of my own experience of depression and anxiety. And that was the factor that I really want to help people. So I know many people actually have similar experience, it's through personal lived experience that they really want to make a difference. But I don't think I really asked you that questions before, how you get into mental health.
Well, it's a mirror image of just what you've said.
Yeah.
The same thing. And I mentioned that my dad had a sports store down in Dunedin, which he had to close up, and he lost a lot of money, and to the point of having to sell his house to pay his creditors. And so I also bought a sports store back in 1985. So I was, what was I, 46 or something at that stage, or 36 actually. My maths is not so good. And had a retail sports store as well, which I loved until things started to go downhill. And I can clearly remember a time I knew that I wasn't feeling great, but I didn't know why. And I just there was one day I was in the shop, and I think my wife and my dad were there at the same time. I think we were going through a refurbishing of the shop. I just had this major panic attack. I didn't know what it was. I just thought, I've got to get out of here. I don't. So I just said to them, I said, look, I'm not feeling great. I'm just going to go home. So I went home, drove home, just feeling crappy. Went home. This is probably early in the afternoon or something, and just got into bed, closed the blinds, and I just. At times I just hoped I wouldn't wake up, so it was just, and I didn't realise till later what it was that I had, so I didn't know what it was. I went and saw the doctor sometime after that, and he said, I think you might be depressed, and so he, I didn't even know what depression was.
Exactly.
I thought it was a term that politicians used.
Yeah.
So, and he said, well look, he gave me some, I don't even know what the medication was, but it was, he said, try this, and it didn't really seem to help. And I went back to him and described a few things. But in the meantime, I thought, somebody said, well, get some counselling. So I got some counselling and that sort of thing. And even though while you were there, sort of had brief moments of feeling better, on the way home, it sort of all just went away again. So, so I think, then when the GP, when I went back to him, he said, well look, I'm going to have to refer you to a psychiatrist. And I thought, what the F would I need a psychiatrist for? Because my impression of a psychiatrist, they were there for mad people. They were there for people in asylums and things like that, I said, I wasn't, I'm not mad. I'm sad, but I'm not mad. So anyway, so I went and saw this psychiatrist, and one of the things that was a real issue was that we were pretty low in money, didn't really have the money to afford to pay for them, and fortunately some of the family rallied around and sort of helped to pay for, well, they probably did pay for the first couple of consults, or however many, had 2 or 3 or something like that. And so she tried me on another medication, and she said, I want you to come back and see me in 2 weeks and I will know whether it's working or not. So I went back and sort of answered things, said, I think I'm feeling a bit better. And she said, no, you're not, or something like that, and said, it's not working. So then she tried me on a nortriptyline. So it was kind of like when I went in there, I said, just give me something to get rid of this feeling, So anyway, that started to make a difference. Took a long time to take effect, but eventually I started to, I guess you'd call it seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. I knew, it just kind of felt like things were getting a little better, but it was a long process. So just, eventually, so I just sort of accepted that, okay, medication was gonna get me there, but it wasn't until I started meeting some people in mental health and that sort of thing that I sort of realised that actually there's more to it than medication. So so probably early on in the piece I learnt about sort of relaxation techniques and that sort of thing. But a lot of it was just doing something I enjoyed doing, because for quite a period of time I enjoyed nothing. It didn't matter how good it might have seemed on the outside, I didn't really enjoy anything. So spent a lot of time sort of crying, mostly to myself and that sort of thing, but occasionally I couldn't stop that. So I wasn't very social, I didn't really like going out and doing things like that. But Yeah, and one thing that really surprised me, I met some people along the way, and and I think it might have started when I joined Aotearoa, which was the West Auckland Mental Health Support Trust. And I joined that in 1999. It had only been going a few months. And I read a thing in the paper that talked about this, this support centre for people with mental health issues. And I sort of read through that, and I thought, oh, actually I'd like to find out a bit more about it. I didn't know where to go to find out. So in the end I contacted the Western leader where the article was. And initially they couldn't really tell me anything. And then they put me on to the health reporter or somebody like that. And he or she gave me a contact. And that contact was Debbie Hager.
Oh,
So
yes.
Debbie at the time I think was the chair of the trust.
Yeah.
I think she was the initial chair of the trust.
Wow.
So I met up with this blonde bombshell, this Debbie Hager.
Yep.
And she said, Gary, you know, how about you come along to one of our meetings and just meet a few people and just sort of get a feel for things as to whether you think it's you or not.
Yeah.
So I went along probably the next month after I'd contacted her or something. We sort of met, and I sort of sat there, and then people were saying, Gary, we'd really like you to have you part of this. And I said, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
They said, well, actually, we need more trustees on the board.
Yes.
And really, honestly, I didn't really know what a trustee was in that capacity. You know, I had no idea. So next thing I knew, you know, I went to the next meeting, and they made me a trustee, or whatever process it was, but they were able to do that. And from that point on, I attended a few other things with Waitakere Health Link, a few Waitemata DHB things where they wanted me to come along wearing what they called the consumer hat, you know, so that you could, and a lot of people said, Gary, we need people like you around our decision-making table or our committee or whatever it was. And of course that's great for your ego, you know, particularly when you've been down for quite a while and people are saying, actually, we want you.
Yes.
And this is why we want you. We want you for your experience and that sort of thing. Not my intellect.
I think it's a bit unfair though. I mean, to what you just say to yourself, because I think you have so many transferable skills that you learn throughout the time before. That's why you're not just bringing your lived experience.
Probably had.
They also,
I never would have thought of it in that way. But sort of, obviously, subsequently I have. But I wasn't one to build myself up or, you know, make me greater than than I was. You know, but it was just it really helped, and I met some key people. Penny Hulse was one of the first people, and Penny at that stage was a councillor with it was Waitakere City Council then. She subsequently went on to be the deputy mayor, I think it was, of the Auckland Council.
That's right.
So, you know, and she was hugely supportive and introduced me to a few other people. And interesting enough, I think in 2002, I decided I'd stand for the health board.
Yes.
I'd never had a political bone in my body, and I thought there was quite a bit of encouragement, including from Penny.
Yes.
And so, well, just give it a go, Gary. So anyway, I put my $200 in and filled out the application form.
Yes.
And I stood for the council there, and Penny said, okay, how about you and I do this together? So, I mean, Penny had the profile. She was already on the health board.
Yes.
And so we did everything together on the billboards and that sort of thing. I mean, you know, Penny was, you know, a face well known and I was an unknown, but, you know, we went together and we put up the billboards and all that sort of thing. So sort of my little photo and that sort of thing on there, and that was just a wonderful experience, you know, with doing it with somebody like Penny, who's just gorgeous. And so then I think my self-esteem took a huge boost at that time, and sort of a few years later, when I was in fact in 2004, I was still working in the sports industry, even though I'd closed my shop down, but I was doing various roles, and I was at where was I? I was at Rebel Sport. I started with Rebel Sport. I think I was the second person they employed in the country before any store had opened.
Wow.
But I looked at that, and I came from my own little sports store to this mega sports store where people bought in shopping trolleys, and and it kind of overwhelmed me.
Yes.
Really, I sort of thought, yeah, I love my sport, but this was a different concept.
Yes.
And I worked for them for quite a while, for about 4 years, and then I realised that actually that wasn't me. And I thought, then I sort of came back to what I'd learned from people along the way and some of the committees. And I thought, if I want to make a real difference, a better difference in mental health, or supporting people in their mental health, I've got to get in boots and all. So I was 55 years old, and I saw an ad in the paper for, I think they called it a consumer development leader for Framework Trust.
Yeah, wow.
And I looked at that and I read it, and I sort of thought, oh wow, that's me. So I sent this application form away, got the interview, and Julie got the job. And I remember when I was told I had the job, it felt like one of the best days of my life.
Wow.
Because it was kind of like somebody wanted me for my lived experience, which is what we subsequently called it, but just my experience and that sort of thing. So so that was really the start of my career in mental health.
Wow.
With its ups and downs and its rocky bit that you all know, Ivan, through supporting me through some of those times. But it really started off a later in life career in mental health. And I think when I look back on it, I mean, there's a lot to be thankful. Yep, there's a few people that made life hard along the way. But one thing that didn't make it hard was some of the other consumers, other people that I came across. There was nobody there that made it hard. The people that made it hard were generally management and things like that, where it was sort of, I sort of had opposing views. And after probably being the CEO's lapdog for a year or so and that sort of thing, I kind of eventually found my voice. And I sort of, when I started to disagree with her on some things, that's when the shit hit the fan. So, but I didn't back down. I just sort of thought, no, I'm strong, and I'm not a confrontational person. But I just sort of thought, no, that's not right. So in the end, I left that one, and then a lovely lady by Lorna Murray, we caught up for a coffee when I had lost my job, and she said, Gary, I've been talking to the board of, it was then called
Connect.
AMHS, and then it became Connect Support and Recovery.
Yeah.
And we want to sort of help embed sort of a consumer ethos into the organisation. I've got a bit of budget money. How would you like come? So she said, would you like to come and work for me? She said, it won't be permanent, but it'll be like a 3-month fixed term contract.
Yeah.
And I said, just loved it. Lorna was one of the people I'd seen before I even got a job that I'd met in various meetings, and she was one of the people I went along to say, look, I think I need to get into mental health. And she was just one of those people who was just so supportive, So anyway, went and worked for her for a while. In the meantime, they got the peer support contract along with Mind and Body. I'm pretty sure it was, for Waitemata DHB. So it was the first peer support contract. And so that fixed term thing just evolved into a full-time job with peer support. I sort of did a dual thing for a while. So I had sort of board responsibilities, or representing the consumer voice, if you like, on the board, not as a board member, but used to go along. And also, kept seeing Lorna as sort of my main contact, as well as being the part of the peer support team. That worked pretty well most of the time, but I think there were people around there in the organisation who I think probably saw a conflict of interest, or here's somebody who's got a direct line to the CEO and he's just an employee. So it caused a few problems, but nothing insurmountable. And Lorna was very supportive all the way through. You know, she was one of these people that I was going to say she was a very good listener. She was profoundly deaf.
Yes.
But she was one of the best listeners you could have.
Yeah, a wonderful human being as well.
A wonderful human being.
Yeah.
So that really, you know, that sort of made a huge difference. And then the job at the Regional Consumer Network came along. Yeah.
Gary, I have to say, even though we knew each other for such a long time, it's truly the first time I hear about the whole history of...
I wasn't going to tell you everything.
That's amazing. And people probably didn't know, so you really kind of piloted a few services now actually has become the foundation of those organizations, I would have to say.
Well, and that, I mean, it's interesting you should say that, because I kind of felt after a while that I got opportunities really at the beginning of some of the stuff.
Yeah, very beginning.
Things like peer support, and I remember being approached by, the name will come to me, but said that there was going to be a new website developed called depression.org.nz.
Yes, yeah.
And I'll think of the lady's name. Anyway, she's gorgeous. She interviewed me for one of the parts, and they wanted about people from 5 or 6 different backgrounds in mental health to feature on this website. It was fronted by John Kerwin, because it was probably not too many years after John came out and talked about his mental health issues. And of course, for a lot of people, with, you know, probably the most famous All Black at that time, you know, to come out with that sort of thing. So John fronted the thing, and so I was one of the first people on the depression.org.nz website.
Have you checked and see whether
I haven't. Apparently, it's shifted to I don't know what the terms are.
I will go and find out, don't worry.
Whether it's a blog or on YouTube or something. I don't know whether I don't even know whether the website still exists. But it's, so that was kind of a sort of, you know, and again, great for the ego, but I really felt, you know, I had no hesitation in sharing stuff that sort of helped. And
I do want to say, Gary, your story is so powerful, even though things have changed and people believe things have changed, you know, like people are more likely to talk about mental health issue and all that. However, I know a lot of men still find it hard to articulate their feeling.
Absolutely. And this is where John Kerwin, I'm sure, you know, and there would have been a lot of skeptics thinking, oh, you're just acting a part here. But when they realised, when he's put his book out, I think it was called something like All Blacks Don't Cry or something like whatever it was, and people started to take notice. And I think that a lot of these, you know, the Kiwi blokes, sort of, it probably just it got a few of them seeking help, whereas before they just had to eat concrete and get over it, you know, or whatever their mates were telling them, you know. So I think a lot more awareness was put to men's health, men's mental health. I've always believed that women are far better at looking after their health. It's generalizing, but far better than men.
Yeah, you know? And what I really love about your story, beside that, is about your willingness to get help. When the depression.org started, after some time, they have done some research, and one of the quote that came out was quite powerful, is that men, after they realize they might have something similar, they go to see GP, they don't say I have depression, they say I have what John Kerwin have. So it became...
Or they could see some of their experience in what John Kerwin's story was.
Yeah, exactly. So Gary, I mean, like, you're part of that story and legacy, so that is big.
Yeah, it is big. And I just had so many opportunities while I was at Frameworks. I was going back a little way now. After I was there for less than a year, the Counties Manukau DHB mental health development team approached the CEO and said, look, we'd like to second Gary to our mental health development team, you know, on a 50-50 sort of thing with them, because there was a number of things that Counties Manukau were going to do, including bringing peer support to New Zealand, which really wasn't there in the mental health space. So, and when I sort of said, well, wow, okay, And one of the first things he said, Gary, we want to send you to Arizona to an organisation called Meta Services, which is now called Recovery Internationals, Recovery Innovations International or something. So I was sent over there with the team leader of one of the CMHCs in South Auckland and a psychiatrist, believe it or not. So the three of us went over there to learn about peer support.
Wow.
And it was such a wonderful experience. I think we were there for about 10 days or something.
Wow.
So we went along, the three of us were sort of involved with about 20 odd people from various parts of the states.
Wow.
And they were mostly in clinical or health professional roles. I can't even recall whether there was any other consumers on that. There may have been. But it was just such a wonderful environment. Never experienced anything like it. And I say to people when I got home, I felt like Billy Graham on a crusade. I said, this was just such a wonderful thing to experience, and so then it started from there, really.
Can I say, this is how humble you are. I knew you 20 years, you never brag about any of this. It's not because my gut feeling is like, I need to talk to this guy. That is the reason why I was like, I really didn't know all this. Wow.
I mean, I guess it's, really happy to share my story, but my dad was a pretty humble sort of a person. Even though he grew to great heights in his sport, you'd never know it talking to him. I guess that's some of his qualities that I probably have got as well. So, yeah.
But I do want to emphasize like what you say. Now we have peer support service. So everybody thought, oh, it was always there, but it's not, isn't it? It wasn't any of that kind of power from lived experience. It was quite one-sided.
And look, really, the only thing remotely close to it would be in the addictions area was through what do they call it? Through AA and the 12-step program.
Yes, that's
and
right.
that really, you think about that, Alcoholics Anonymous goes way back to the 1930s or something. So in effect, there's massive peer support in that, but in terms of mental health, it didn't exist before about 2005.
The funny thing is Framework and Connect then merged together become
Absolutely. The two organisations I work for, merged together. Yes. You're right, and I understand it's doing okay, and I think their peer support or whatever they call it.
Yes.
I think you mentioned the name before. Don't know. Whatever it was, it's got a pretty good reputation. Yes. So it's great being at the genesis, the beginning of some of these things. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you didn't stop there. I know you also helped with the early stages of some of the primary healthcare services as well, isn't it? With the new development.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's amazing the way things happen. I didn't apply for a job. Somebody asked me if I'd like to. I think I'd finished working full time with people. I think I was doing a bit of part-time work. I think I was doing some audit work for audit agencies, service audit work. And then I met up with a guy called Paul Engel, who at that time was the CEO of Pathways. And I met him up for coffee, and on the pretense that we knew people from our past as well. And I said, I'm here under false pretenses, Paul. I said, I'm actually looking for some work. And I gave him a bit of background. He said, well, actually, it's interesting you should say that. We've got a new contract, or we're getting a new contract from Counties Manukau, DHB, which came out of the mental health support team, which I worked for about 5 or 6 years earlier.
Wow.
And it was to create a consumer-run peer support service, basically, but in a residential situation where people actually lived there as part of their recovery, I think it's an alternative to going into mental health inpatient units in Papatoe. So that was part of that, and then that was one of the contracts they got, and the other contract was actually to have a totally peer-run service, and Manurewa. So I was there as in a project management role with him to get that particular contract up and running. But probably without saying too much, I think the board got cold feet at that stage, and they pulled the contract. So, but that was brief. So that no sooner that one had finished, and then one of the other people who were very supportive of me, going way back, was David Kadaya.
Yes.
And I first met David when I was at Te because at that stage I think, I don't know what his role was, but he was at Waitemata DHB.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I think, I'm not sure who contacted who, whatever. Actually, David contacted me. He said to me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, actually, interesting, Dave. I just finished a project with Pathways." And he said he had been asked to go to West Coast DHB as a what do they call him? A consultant, psychiatric consultant, or something.
Wow.
Whatever it was.
Yes.
Because of issues they were having with their mental health and addictions area. And he said he asked the people who called the review, who have you got on the review panel or whatever you call it,
Yes.
with lived experience? And they said, "Oh, we've got somebody who we can bring in." And David apparently said something like, "Well, that's actually not good enough. We need somebody with lived experience to be a full part of this review." So anyway, I think David's reputation was such that people listened when he talked. And then he contacted me and said, "Gary, how would you like to be part of this review panel?"
Wow.
So the next thing I knew, I was sort of on a flight to Greymouth with David, and we went down to be part of this review. And I think it was on the plane on the way home that David said, "Actually, Gary, I'm just, I think at that stage he was with ProCare, and he either said, I'm about to go to East Tamaki Healthcare, or he had just gone to East Tamaki Healthcare. And he said, one of the things that we want to do is introduce peer support into primary health, alongside people with long-term health conditions, and the ones that they focused mostly on was diabetes, which in the area of Aotearoa and South Auckland was a pretty big, and still is a pretty big issue. And I sort of said, "Well, you're talking my language, David," and he knew me long enough and well enough to know that. So I became, alongside another beautiful lady, Merle Samuels, we were the first 2 peer support specialists to be employed in primary mental health.
Wow.
So that was, I had about 3 odd years with Tamaki Health, and I said to people later on when I left, it just felt like they were 3 of the best years of my whole working life.
Wow.
And David was a massive part of that.
Yeah.
Such a believer in the, for a guy who's
a wonderful human being too. Yeah.
Well, he is, and I think he's just so real in terms of he gets the consumer voice, and he openly admits, he said, "Gary, I've never experienced anxiety, I've never experienced depression," but he just had such almost an innate understanding of the journey that people are on.
Wow.
And so, he was anything but a prescribing psychiatrist. He was very much a wellness person. So
But that service eventually became the current health coach and health improvement. Or not?
Well, that's another stage. So
oh my God!
while I was working with David, he said, "We're working with ProCare initially for a contract we're considering putting up, or had just put up, where they were looking for, what do they call it? A proposal, RFP.
RFP, request for proposal.
Request for proposal form for primary mental health, and it was partially to bring people with lived experience into it, into what they would call a health coach, but also health improvement practitioners, or HIPs, I think they call them,
that's right,
for short, who were to augment primary health, to work alongside the GPs, the practice nurses, in the clinics.
Yeah.
And again, you know, David, you're talking my language. I'd love to see this happen. So, yeah, I remember sitting around a board table at ProCare a few times
Yes.
with a lot of industry, mental health industry leaders around the table, some of whom I knew already, and you know, just going through the angst, because a lot of it was angst. It was, I don't think the ministry made it particularly easy to get this. So I know that David and his counterparts in ProCare probably had some battles to get as far as they did. But eventually, and I think it came out of a wellbeing budget that Labor had. I remember Robertson was there, and I think it was something like $455 million over whatever, 2 years or something like that, 2 or 3 years. And that was specifically for primary mental health, which was the first time ever that's happened. So it all came out of that pot, and so I was one of the first people trained to be a health coach.
Amazing.
As part of the first group. So so a lot of these things were first timers, you know. I just felt so privileged, you know. And I was at that stage, I was in my 60s, you know, so I wasn't quite past my use-by date. But,
no, you know, you're still not.
But it was just so good to be part of that. Part of that, and that's where I just felt so privileged, you know. But also that, you know, people who believed in me or had come across me at some stage said, you know, I want you to come and work for us. I mean, that had never happened to me before. But how often did people come along to you and sort of say, I want you to come and work for me? So
I think that, again, you know, like, is that you have that integrity people can lean on, which is very important for mental health sector, isn't it? Because you want someone to be able to uphold that manner and speak the truth, and also able to kind of, you know, like challenge the system at time when you need to, because you're not there to agree. Isn't it?
Absolutely. So, you know, and it was, I learned, I've never been backward in seeking help, but I remember when I started getting kind of leadership roles in mental health in the NGO sector, that Vicky Burnett was one of my first kind of mentors, really. And, you know, so I used to see her periodically, and we just sort of bounced off things, to some of the challenges I was having, usually with the CEO. But, you know, just some of that, and just as a bit of a sounding board and that sort of thing, and just giving me some tools to work with to sort of minimise the impact on myself, you know. So
so yes, I mean, I understand at some stage, you know, like we talk about, and that was part of like your journey of winding down and to retire as well. But things kind of change a little bit, doesn't it?
Things change a bit, So I one of the good things was that all the time I worked for East Tamaki Healthcare, or Tamaki Health as it is now, I was always part-time, and that worked for me, because I did a few other things, amongst of which was as a lived experience auditor with service agencies. So I had some audit work, some contract work that I did, as well as working for Tamaki Health. So when I retired from Tamaki Health in 2017, I was still doing some audit work. I did a bit of voluntary work and stuff like that. So so I was able to carry that on for a while. And then around 2001, my wife, something wasn't quite right. And so we eventually had a clinician sort of come and talk to her and talk to us and do some tests, and she was diagnosed with a rare dementia condition called primary progressive aphasia, because I had no idea what aphasia was, let alone anything else. So it was a bit of a jolt, but some people who, like our daughter and daughter-in-law particularly, just said, something's not right with Mum, you've got to do something about it. So I couldn't quite see it, probably because I was, you know, we were together 24/7 pretty much, just forgetting a few words and things like that. So So we had this new diagnosis. And for somebody who had always been well, it was Gary that was that went through, you know, periods of illness and, you know, and that sort of thing. So this and Janelle had a really, she was in the upper quartile in terms of IQ, very intelligent, very, very good at what she did, and that sort of thing. So, and probably like the quintessential working mother, you know, bring up, well, we had 2 kids and, you know, get the kids off to school, get their lunches, you know, go to work, come home, get their dinner. I mean, I'm sure I helped along the line somewhere, but, you know, basically she did all of that. And then, of course, we got that, and just after she was diagnosed, COVID came. So, you know, she went from this fully, really active, you know, working life, you know, total stimulation, the brain was always stimulated, to almost like falling off a cliff, you know, operating way up here. COVID comes along and bang, all she's got is me, you know, and lockdowns, we all know about lockdowns. So, you know, I think the brain, it didn't stop working, but it was no longer stimulated. And we don't know whether what she had stemmed back to that, because that was 2019. She wasn't formally diagnosed until the end of 2021. But it could very well have been the start of something. So what I found is that, and progressively it got harder, her communication was all to do with speech and language. So it got harder to do. And I look back on it now and sort of think that if I hadn't have had the experience I had of recovery and relapse and mental health and mental illness and some of the resilience I suppose I built up over that time, I don't think I could have handled my wife being sick. And about just under a year ago, we, with some prompting from some really good friends, said, Gary, you really need to make a move, and the retirement village is probably the way to go, one that's got different step levels of care. So we moved in August last year, and since we've been there in the last coming up 3 months, we've had to, as a family, we've had to make the hard decision to put her into the rest home area of that, not just because of her aphasia condition, but some other things that were sort of creeping and that were just too hard for me to deal with, so I couldn't look after her the same. So it's probably happened a bit earlier than we thought, but it certainly was in the back of the mind when we made the move that at some point, probably Janelle, but either of us might need extra care. So that's the way it sort of turned out.
And I really want to say thank you for sharing that, you know, like, because first, when I first thought about it, is to have the opportunity to advocate and raise awareness about the disease, and also the organizations, because I remember you told me the organization, I can't even remember the name.
Probably Aphasia New Zealand.
Aphasia New Zealand, has been very instrumental in the process of supporting you and your...
Well, it is, and it's sort of it's quite a fledgling organisation, because the term aphasia, which is really what they call a frontotemporal dementia, basically, but it's all to do with speech and language, and it's a relatively new diagnosis. And the reality is that I think somewhere over 80% of people who develop a form of aphasia have had a stroke. So as a result of the stroke, sometimes they can't speak for a while, or their speech becomes laboured and that sort of thing. But for a lot of people, they recover their speech.
I see.
But the one that Janelle's got, there is no recovery. She didn't have a stroke, didn't have a traumatic brain injury. It was a neurological condition. So, so I've been, again, but that privilege again, almost at the beginning of the lived experience voice, or in this case, more specifically, as the partner of somebody who has this condition. So, yeah, there's a lot of, in fact, myself and one other lady whose husband had the same condition, we started off a partner support group about 3 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of like, the experience from the partner's perspective, which has been huge. And it's, I think we've all learned a lot. I mean, it's a place where you can speak freely. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry that your wife or your spouse is there and saying something that could cause offence. But mostly it's just learning from each other. So. But yeah, it's been a privilege. Yeah.
And I think it's so critical, especially I remember our conversations is when people have those diagnoses, it's most likely they will be in the later stages of their life. So that is another reason why it can be so isolated too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so unlike mental health, it can start from adolescence or even earlier than adolescence. And whilst there is no age here, but mostly it's people in their 60s and 70s that develop. Obviously there's some younger, I'm sure there's a few people in their 40s and 50s that have, but that's kind of rare. So it's more related to aging.
Yeah, and I think there is another kind of set of issues that society not often talk about is we kind of plan our future, isn't it, including retirement and all that, and how do you deal with it when suddenly there's another curveball just, like in front of you? And well, that's the dealing with it, as I mentioned before. I'm sure if I hadn't built up the resilience I had for getting through my own situation, I don't think, I certainly would not have handled it if we had still been living in our home. And what I hope is, if anyone's watching at all, to really spark some conversation about, don't assume just people in certain stages and then they do not need further support.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky to reconnect with you after I left my previous job because because I was so busy and that kind of really opened my eyes. Like, wow, I just when I first connect back to you again, I just felt sad on your behalf because I
mean, life got away with you. I mean, you're so bloody conscientious that I don't think I've ever worked any more than maybe a 45-hour week, but it sounds like you were doing an 80 to 100-hour weeks, and while I've been conscientious, I've never been that married to any job I've had where I'll burn the midnight oil. It's just never been me.
Very wise. Very wise. No, it's true. Yeah.
But I think the overall thing is, I think we started with the interview was around, asking for help. We were talking about, when people see John Keewan, I've been prompted by this, and so to actually just go and see your doctor, and then not to rely on Dr. Google. There's so many good ways to get better information, and one of them is Health Navigator. So I put a plug in for Health Navigator.
They call it Healthify now.
Healthify.
Oh, you were part of that too. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. So I was part of that too. So I worked as I was part of their lived experience sort of team at Health Navigator for part time for a while.
I will put a link on because it's big.
So Healthify, just very trusted information. It's New Zealand. It's New Zealand. It's not international, so it's all related to here.
And funded by the Ministry of Health as well. So it's
I think they've got some funding. They get there.
And another wonderful person, a doctor who you knew as well. What's the name?
Janine Bycroft.
Yes.
So Janine, pretty well. Her and a group of others started off, I think, in the lounge of her home. You hear about people starting off a new business in their garages. Well, she just met with a few people, and I first met Janine. They had long-term conditions conferences.
Wow.
And I can't remember the one I went to, but it'd be all of 10 years ago, I'm sure. And that's where I first met her, and that was for people with, long-term health conditions. So, and there was a few speakers with lived experience that came on that.
So you started, you're part of many pilots. Now it's really thriving. So if anyone wants to start a pilot, they have to get you on board.
Well, I've got my pilot's license.
So it's an assurance that it's going to thrive. and yeah, all that, you know, like the Healthify, Hips and Health Coach, peer support, those you mentioned have done fantastic job, even including counties peer support services is still flourishing. So
Yeah. No, it's, honesty has been a privilege. It's stroked my ego going along because I feel wanted and needed, and you know, and I know that I'm contributing something. So,
but there's a thing I want to mention as well, because a lot of, like, you were from private sector, early stages, and then move to kind of like a, you know, like mental health, and everything's new. And that was through passion. That was through your own lived experience.
And then when I finally started to feel that I'm actually coming right here, and that's just meetings of just the right people, not seeking them out necessarily, but people sort of when they've heard me speak at a meeting or something like that, and said, look. You know,
and that's why I
shoulder tapping.
I go into my own slogan, which is clarity, essence, and authenticity. That's when you thrive, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, because you were just purely yourself, you speak from your truth, and then you share it with the world.
Yep.
And people see it.
I've got no need to bullshit or embellish anything. You know, I don't need to make it any bigger than it or any lesser than it is, because it's just that's the whole thing about being authentic. So that's but no, it's privilege.
It's an honor. I don't know what to say, Gary. I mean, like what I say, you know, I knew you for so many years. I knew you have done a lot of things, but I have no idea the full scope of it. It's a privilege, my friend.
I'm just showing off.
You have all the right. Yeah. Thank you, my friend. Really.